Welcome to Minerva, a monthly show where we discuss the mysteries. We hope to give you enough information that you can go away and do your own study. Now, because of COVID-19, we're back at home filming again, but we wanted to bring you a new episode this month based on whether Bacon wrote Shakespeare. Before we start, I'd like to thank all of our new subscribers, and if you haven't subscribed yet, please do click the button below. Now, this is a different type of topic for us. It's very wide-ranging, and it doesn't always fall within the types of mysteries that we talk about. However, it's something that we're both really passionate about. And before we start, we've got to talk about the two gentlemen involved in this mystery. So who was William Shakespeare? Well, some will call him William Shakespeare because he was born in Stratford-upon-Avon, and he was a son of a glove maker. Now, this was in and around the middle of the 1500s, but he's widely regarded as one of the best playwrights and poets ever. Now, the public still really like his work, and there's so many phrases that we still use today which are born from those things that he said in his poems and sonnets and his plays. Moving on to Bacon, or Sir Francis Bacon, he was born a couple of years just before Shakespeare, and he was a nobleman, philosopher, and known for lots of other things within science in that time. Now, questions appear around him within all different types of mysteries, whether or not he was born into the family that he belonged to, and also whether or not he was doing strange things when he was the confidant to the Queen. Now, this is a huge subject, and it's been debated for many, many years. There are scholars, historians, and lots of other people with really deep knowledge of this, far deeper than mine, who you can go away and research further. But what we're hoping to do is inspire you to get interested into this topic. Now, as I say, I'm not a Shakespeare expert, but I had a typical English schooling, and we did work on the plays and we wrote things about them, essays, etc. And that's really where I kind of left Shakespeare. However, Bacon has been someone that I've always really enjoyed reading about and researching, and I continue to do that to this day. But where I lack with some Shakespeare knowledge, I believe my co-host Duncan, you know a little bit more than I do.
Right, thanks, Dan. Yeah, hello, Dan. Hello, everyone. To be honest, I don't know if I know more about Shakespeare than you do. My education is pretty much the same as yours. I was exposed to it as we all are at school. I did study literature later on in life, where of course he does come up. But I suppose the bit you're referring to is that there's quite a chapter in my life when I was performing Shakespeare. For around about a decade, I was doing that. So I did manage to perform several of the histories, the tragedies, and the so-called comedies. Although, yeah, they're fun once you get to the jokes. And it was a good company. I mean, we were even hiring the costumes from the RSC, the Royal Shakespeare Company. So it was amazing to be dressed up in sometimes full armour doing the histories. It was amazing. The benefit of that, I can understand, is the sense of, because of performing the plays and you're performing the same things over and over again, you do get to appreciate the depth of what the literature actually is. It's the same as being Masons. We know we perform the same rituals over and over again. You just can't help but sometimes slipping into actually hearing what you're saying or hearing what somebody else is saying and seeing how much depth and beauty and there is to take from it. So, yeah, I'm happy to offer that. The other great time of that experience, that there'll be people around me, directors and other actors who are real Shakespeare fanatics, and they would drop in snippets of information of certain lines that have been changed, certain parts of the plays that historically were taken out, even down to words which they're pretty much taken as they believe to be wrong because they just don't make sense, even from the state of antiquity. So, yeah, I'm happy to throw that in. I do enjoy Shakespeare, sadly. So I am a Shakespeare fan. But the interesting thing is, I'm interested in him purely from a concept of art. I consider it completely separate to my interest in Francis Bacon. Francis Bacon is, I think you know more about him than I do. I mean, for me, it is a name that comes up frequently in the stuff that we read about and we enjoy. I've never written a paper about him, but yeah, I'm familiar with him. But for him, I'm interested, from my other side of the passions, the more, for a better phrase, the academic things, the stuff that you and I study and read. So it's interesting having a discussion here about two parts of my life which I've never really put side by side, and so it's interesting to go in. So it comes down to this question: where do I stand on, do I believe Francis Bacon wrote the Shakespeare plays? And from an initial reaction, I'd say, no, I can't see it. There's too many things that are solid in there for me to go, no, it doesn't make sense. But preparing for today, in looking at other people's opinions and things like that, it is amazing how deep this argument goes. Not just a sense of the different ideas that goes on, but who's actually proposing them. You have academics, guys with IQs of 190, turning around and saying, no, there's a secret code here. You should be looking at this. It's humbling to see all these bits and pieces. But I have to say, I still stick to the thing. I don't think Francis Bacon wrote the Shakespeare plays, but that might be because I'm a bit of a fan of Shakespeare. I don't want anybody else to write them. But anyway, what about you, Dan? Who do you favour?
Well, after doing lots of research, I believe that Bacon was involved in writing the plays. I just don't think he wrote them all. I don't think he had time. My theory is that he was probably the mastermind behind some of these, with a group of writers and potentially with William Shakespeare or Shakespeare as the frontman. Now, looking at the work of people like Peter Dawkins, who has come to Minerva and given a great talk about Bacon, and people like Peter Amundsen, who has done a couple of really good documentaries on the subject, I start to see the research they're doing, and I am along those lines. Now, Peter and I spoke while he was filming Sweet Swan of Avon, and he sent me some really good information, some really interesting stuff. And that's always been something that I've held quite dear. It's something I've been really interested in. Certainly the Northumberland Manuscript, when you look at that, this is a piece of paper and it's got lots of frayed and burnt edges. It looks fantastic. And it's found wrapped around a lot of Bacon documents. Now, it's a table of contents and it has William Shakespeare, it has Neville, who's somebody else that comes up through some of this research, and it obviously has Bacon, all of them together, and it looks like it's a contents of who wrote the plays, although that can't be quite proved. For me, that's really fascinating, and I think that's, if there is a smoking gun, it's the closest we've got to it so far. Now, I've enjoyed watching the documentaries and other people's work, and what I'm not going to do today is go into the real fine detail of that, because we would be here for hours and hours. This is a really wide-ranging subject. But what I can do is recommend that you go away. If you look in the links in the description, we'll post the videos that you can go and see to get some of that finer detail. Now, I know that you've watched the documentaries as well, Duncan. What are your opinions on them?
Yeah. Good presentations. Yeah, some of the best that I've actually seen online, giving one of those rare balances between someone going in very open-minded, being skeptical at the beginning, taking in information and being impressed with it, but then also continually questioning and sometimes, disregarding some things being offered as evidence. Highly recommend watching those ones. With regard to what you've just said yourself, in the sense of the closest thing I think we've got for a smoking gun, or maybe a rubber band gun, is this the collection of manuscripts which were found in a personal library. We should point out that the library wasn't actually Bacon, so there is a possibility that those manuscripts could have gone together by the owners of that library. And so if they got odd papers together, filed them up, put an index at the front, there you go. But it still comes back to this material. Now, I know you don't want to go into detail, but I think it's important to point out some issues I had with the video. Because, the whole idea, this argument was being proposed in the preceding one by Peter, was the idea that in the first folio of Shakespeare's manuscripts, that there is several poignant clues using number ciphers and bits and pieces like that, through either mistakes that pointed out that Francis Bacon was the author or one of the authors of the Shakespeare plays, and people were paying homage to this in this manuscript. The major problem I have with that is a case of quite a lack of understanding of how these books were put together. I mean, the first folio of Shakespeare's was the first bit of proofreading that actually happened were only on the manuscripts that they had, which were, I think, about 7 of the plays were printed beforehand. They were in 3 grades. One was like fairly good quality. Second one was okay, not too bad. Because the manuscripts they have from 2 sources. One would actually be what the actor was given, which would basically only be his part of the play. When Shakespeare or when any of the plays were wrote during that period, the writer would only write the part for whoever's speaking. And so you'd never have a full script. You'd only have your part, what you're saying. And so if somebody wanted to put a play together, they would have to gather up every character's paper and put the script together. That's one of the reasons why having a folio was so important, because it was so rare to get all the scripts together. And if the manuscript didn't come from them, then it actually came from people who were sitting in the audience trying to write it down, because they wanted to write it down because if they could sell it, it made money. And so there were rights to plays. And so the problem I have with the folio is a case of, we know that all the manuscripts that got together to go in there were from different sources. Not only that the only proofreading that happened was on the documents before it was put to print. Now, with print in those days, you would have had the printer who owned the company who did all the bits and pieces. But then you'd have one poor sod who literally had a sheet out there, and he had to take out each little letter piece by piece and put it in. And it was such a laborious job that normally it was given to, the apprentice or someone low level to actually go and do it. And so, of course, some of these people were illiterate, and so they were literally just trying to follow something on the side, and normally unsupervised. So majority of the mistakes are literally because you had an apprentice literally putting in the letters. Now, that's something that we know about books of that period. In fact, the other thing we know is that out of the 900 pages of the first folio, only 193 of them were actually proofread during the publication. So there's only 93 pages that actually got corrected, which also creates the part that we know that there is not one edition of the first folio which is identical. Every single one is different, because at each point they'd find something wrong and then they'll correct it. The other thing we know is that the typesetter, or the person who put in the letters, there wasn't one person who did it. There is up to 5 different styles that's actually in the print setting. So when they're saying about numbers out of order, or there's not a capital L, that's a smaller L, it's really pretty much down to the guy who put the letters in. It would be really incredible for somebody to come along, push the guy on the way, so actually I need this specifically here and I need this specifically there. Especially when you're looking at books that they had errors. They were known to have errors. So to put errors in as a clue would be ridiculous, because books had errors. They were expecting it. The other thing that I would have to bring up, and only because it's to me it's one of those prime examples we talked about in our last one, about this sacred geometry stuff. I know it's not sacred geometry, but that wonderful thing we said about when people try to line things up by, well, we use this side of the O on that one, we use this side and that. And this is something I think you like. It's one in the text where there's an apparent Pythagorean triangle which goes around the idea of a rosy cross, which looks really good when flashed at and everyone's talking about it. But when you look at it, you start on one side of the O for one side, then you have to go to the other side of the S to make it work. And then when it goes over to, I think it's the C, it's just any random spot the 2 lines meet. Like all of the coding that was meant to be in the book, it looked all by luck, by chance. There's no credibility to it. We would only be looking at one folio edition out of, I think I can't remember, maybe around 300, I think, printed, or could be wrong. But each one of those would have been different, and all of them would have had mistakes. So I'm sorry, Dan. What do you think about your little triangle?
I really like the triangle. I think the triangle's purposeful, and I think it was put there by Bacon. We know that Bacon was into ciphers. We know that he wrote books and his own patterns, etc. about this stuff. So it feels like this is something that he would do to give us a clue. When we look at Petter's research, he'll show that these clues all keep on leading to somewhere, which is really, really interesting. They start off with the Rosicrucian movement, of which you know that I'm a fan about. And we've got no evidence that Bacon was ever a Rosicrucian, but we have no evidence that anybody was at that time. However, we know that the society existed. So whether or not we call it the Invisible College because Bacon owned the Canterbury Tower and there were some beautiful things on the walls there that we know kind of link back to either Freemasonry or Rosicrucianism, there's this link there, and there's this underground stream, there's a thread where Bacon was pulling some strings, well, certainly in my opinion. So, where does it all go? Well, when you watch the documentaries and when you read that type of research, it goes to Oak Island, our friend, because we haven't done an episode on that yet, but we must do. And we do continue to talk about that in lots of our other episodes because everything seems to lead to Oak Island. Now, when he gets there, he finds 2 rocks on the floor, which are said to be the marker stones to lead to the Tree of Life. And he believes that underneath the swamp are Bacon's manuscripts. Now, I don't know how far I can believe that. I think that's really far-fetched that, Bacon would go and take these manuscripts all the way to Nova Scotia, hide them in a lead container full of liquid metal, just so that they're preserved. But stranger things have happened. I think reading and doing this research has been really fun, and I'm still kind of trying to make my mind up. However, I do think Bacon was involved. But I also wonder, Duncan, what do you think? Who should be debating this stuff? Should it be mystery buffs like us? Should it be lawyers and historians? Or should it be the people that have been researching this for the longest, the English lit students?
Wow, yeah, good question. Different aspect. Who should be researching this? I suppose it's like all the subjects we have. We bring in so many different aspects of points of view, and each one is important for those group of people. You're quite right. There's literary students who could be interested in who actually wrote them. You will have the people who feel that all codes lead to some concept of buried treasure. In a sense of this idea of going to Oak Island, I'm sorry, you know me, I'm straight. It's ridiculous. You would have to have Bacon being so self-aware of how important his documents are to, as you say, travel the other side of the world to bury them and leave clues of errors in a book known to have errors, and someone's going to find it. It makes no sense. To be honest, the only reason I think these sort of arguments come up is because they lose track of the first question we have, which is, did Bacon write Shakespeare? The actual prize is just nothing more than notoriety. Who actually wrote them? It wouldn't change what the plays are. It wouldn't change how we appreciate them. It won't change how they get presented. Shakespeare's plays are Shakespeare. Even if Bacon wrote them, it wouldn't change them. All it would be was an acknowledgement that Bacon did it. Now, that then comes into the next question, is a case of, if Bacon did do it, why? Why did he do it? Did he do it, as some people argue, because he was a lover of the arts and he had all his serious nature of life, of being the politician, being the philosopher? Did he also enjoy the arts and secretly write these plays to be put on just a bit of self-fun, which is no harm, if you don't feel you could write that poetry while still being a politician, understandable. That I can understand as possible, probable, again, another question. But did he do it as that we're hinting at now about a Rosicrucian order, and he was trying to portray messages through the plays? God, no, I'm sorry, I don't see that at all. Yes, plays were through history used to educate the masses. But there is nothing in those plays that didn't engage with the audiences already. They're not like the moral plays that were portrayed at York, or things that were like the basis of what we now have as Masonic rituals. These are just histories. They're tragedies which are like when we watch something macabre. There is nothing actually in there. And if Bacon was there to show his prowess in his intellect, then any Shakespearean scholar will tell me, well, there's so many mistakes. He puts quotes of people before they've even lived. He has countries neighbouring each other which don't. And he has historical events which don't actually make sense. They didn't exist. But the interesting thing is there was a history book. It was printed, I think it was in 1576 or something. There was a history book. And Bacon never refers to it. He never uses it in any of his work. But a copy of it is in the Stratford Grammar School, the school that Shakespeare is supposed to have attended. And this book contains the same mistakes that are used in the Shakespeare plays. Now, we think that a grammar school is it's just a low level of education at that point. We forget the fact that we say that Shakespeare's came from a glove maker's family. It makes it sound so humble. He was one of the wealthiest families in Stratford-upon-Avon. He would have gone to the grammar school. Grammar schools were the first, one of the most important levels of education at that time. They were originally called grammar because it was first of the 7 liberal arts. They were taught grammar of Latin. They were taught grammar of Greek, both of which would have required an understanding of the same poetry that you actually see in Shakespeare's work. He was literally taught it. There's a history book at his school that has the same mistakes that he puts in his plays. Shakespeare wrote his Shakespeare plays. There's too much evidence in that direction that actually happens. We have so much fun trying to find different people who have wrote them. I mean, it's even in Star Trek films. I think it was Star Trek, The Undiscovered Country. You have one of the Klingons turns around to Spock and quotes a bit of Shakespeare. And Spock notes it, and the Klingon turns around and says, oh, you can't appreciate Shakespeare till you've heard it in its original Klingon. So even Klingons are meant to have written it. I'm sorry, mate. It's Shakespeare, great dude. He wrote them. But I suppose there is another aspect I think we should really cover, which is a case of why we prize Shakespeare so much. Why we're, I think, possibly even having this debate. We say how famous he is now. He's the world's most renowned author. The interesting thing is that only happened during the Victorian period. Before Victoria, he was no more famous than Marlowe or any of his contemporaries at the time. It was only during the Victorian period where the scholars started saying, well, actually, do you know what? This man's really good. Let's put him at the top of the list. And it's only when we say so much of so many phrases that he coined, we now use in our dialect. But that's only really from the Victorian period when he then became famous. And that's the same sort of thing as anything we admire. It's like everyone says like the Mona Lisa is like this beautiful work of art. And to be honest, if you see it, it's good, but the sides are skew-whiff. She's got no eyebrows. The only reason we give it a great value is because the scholars tell us that it was the only painting that Leonardo da Vinci carried with him. So we assume it has an immense value. But to be honest, it's no greater than any other works. And the same things with Shakespeare. We're told to appreciate. It's great, but its elevation would be no better than Marlowe's, Dante's, or anything like that. So, sorry, Dan. It's up to you.
Well, I find it interesting that you talk about other playwrights because we see letters between them and the industry at the time. However, they don't really mention Shakespeare. In fact, there's no letters to him or from him that we know of. And even when we look at his family, when they write to each other, they don't talk about the famous playwright brother. They just talk about him in general terms. So we need to look deeper and maybe look at some of the people that did talk about him in conversation or within letters and things at the time. There was a gentleman called Weaver who called him a spurious writer. There was another guy called Edwards who said that he was masking. Now, I'll come on to masking in a minute. But he said he was a nobleman, in purple robes. And again, that describes Bacon pretty well. So Edwards calls him masking. And I do wonder if he was the front man to a smaller organisation behind him of Bacon and some other people that were helping him write and perform these things. Now, going off on a slight tangent, the UK has a genre of music called drill. Now, it's popular amongst the youth mainly, and it's a very gangster-type rap music. Now, drill artists are quite well known for wearing masks. Now, the public persona is to say that that's because they're gangsters and they can't be caught on camera and they can't be seen. However, the truth when you dig a bit deeper is a little different. A lot of these guys are hard-working people with really good jobs, really good careers, or they're at university and want a career in the future. So they wear the mask so they can't be associated to the things they're talking about in their rap music. And I just wonder if that's what Shakespeare was doing. I wonder if he was somebody who was masked by Bacon and would actually go around performing these plays for him, almost for a fee. He was somebody that was put there. Now, this debate will rage on and on and on, and it does. It's been going for years. There is, as we said earlier, plenty of scholars and other people who are really into this and who are still researching and still finding new things all the time. So, Duncan, we're not going to agree, but that's absolutely fine. What I hope we've done is inspired some people to go away and look at this subject a little bit further. So, please do like and subscribe. Leave some comments. Let us know who wrote Shakespeare. Was it Bacon or was it somebody else? That'd be really interesting to see. And we look forward to seeing you again next time.